So, we all know this one, right? We've heard it before, maybe once or twice. Who knows what it's called?
Beatitudes.
The Beatitudes, or sometimes the Sermon on the Mount.
Or the Sermon on the Plain.
Or, okay, Jane's ahead of us. Because she's right. This isn't Matthew's version of this. This is from Luke's Gospel. It's kind of like the lesser recognized step cousin of what is famously known as the Beatitudes or the Sermon on the Mount from Matthew's Gospel. So instead of getting that to-do list of spiritual values and virtues, which we're all very familiar with, we get something that's a little bit different. It's kind of a more pointed juxtaposition of what appears to be a set of blessings and matching curses. Now, I read this week that each of the four Gospels is like a different sermon. It's a sermon on the life and the ministry and the person of Jesus, but it's being preached to the specific community that they write to. It's the sermon that community of that particular evangelist needs to hear at that moment. So that means that when we have closely related stories in more than one gospel, it's all about the differences that can be our own key to understanding what God might be saying to us and to our own community of faith. So let's take a closer look at Luke's unique choices. Now, Jane hit on the first and most important one. This is not happening on a mountain, right? It's happening on a level place, an open plain. It's the kind of place where people can come from far and wide and they do not need to struggle up a high space. And you know what? It's a bit more like, your basic tent revival in the back 40, only probably minus the tent. Though who knows? Maybe they had some really good tents. I know, tents go back a long time. It's probably taking place in Galilee, but Luke also takes time to mention those foreign cities of Tyre and Sidon. So it may actually be kind of close to the border with Phoenicia, and he makes sure that we know that. Other than that, there's really nothing special about this spot. So rather than picking somewhere that is spiritually or cultically or culturally set apart, the kind of place that we usually expect to go to meet God, Luke chooses to place Jesus in a place that is devoid of all of that usual hierarchy stuff. Maybe even he's challenging it. It's as if he is bringing people together instead of setting them apart. And Jesus' sermon, well, it is open to any and all who want to be there. Which brings us to the difference in the audiences. Luke's really specific about all this because he says there are lots and lots and lots of people from all over the place, a great multitude. They come from Israel, they come from Judea, and they come from across the border in Tyre and Sidon. That means that there's Jews and Gentiles mixed together, and it also means that these people who are coming from across the border, they're from one of those places. You know what I mean by those places. In this case, the Old Testament prophets had pronounced judgment and curses on the cities of Tyre and Sidon. So it's this kind of edgy gathering that really ignores all of those distinctions between people that were seen as very sacrosanct in Jesus' time. So instead, anyone who seeks healing from Jesus, well, they're welcome to come. And every last person who comes receives healing. We make sure that we know that. Yet when Jesus starts to preach, Luke specifies that he shifts his audience. He says that Jesus turns and addresses his disciples. It's like he's saying, I'm talking to you. This is kind of a less public address than the version that we're used to. And it's more of a kind of post-event leadership training for this team that's just pulled off this like wildly beyond their dreams successful mass healing event that, thanks be to God, did not turn into some kind of riot. You kind of wonder if Jesus' disciples were busy trying to figure out all the ways that they can decide who's allowed to come next time and who's not, so they can, limit the crowd. So finally that brings us to what Jesus says. Because this is different. It's not a simple list of virtues or a checklist of how to get into heaven. Each and every blessing is paired up with a kind of an equivalent woe. And each one of those pairings is there to force Jesus' disciples to question one of those judgments that they're probably already making about what kind of people are to be valued and what kind of people they can just sort of set aside and, overlook. See, God sees people differently than people see themselves, and then people see each other. Humanity, the kind of stuff that we value. It's right here in this list. It's easy to pick it out. We value the successful. We value the strong, and we value the popular. But Jesus is cautioning his audience, those disciples, against seeing people with those types of skills as singled out by God or somehow protected from any kind of adversity because of their accomplishments. And Jesus is also saying that humanity has always had this tendency to judge the poor and the hungry and the suffering, to view them as if they have somehow failed in their own pursuits of prosperity, wellness, and righteousness. Jesus says, nope, They are in no way failures in God's eyes, and they should not be in your own either. So, to sum it up, in Luke's version of Jesus' most famous sermon, Jesus is sitting right there with his core leadership team, and he is challenging them to use God's eyes. He's challenged them to use God's eyes with the people to whom they are ministering, but also with themselves. He uses this setting that's all-inclusive. He invites everybody to come, and he upends all of the usual metrics for determining who is worthy and who is not. Luke's readers are likewise challenged to re-examine how they, and we, because of course we're those readers too, construct our own self-worth and how we judge others. It's kind of like Luke's community of faith might need to hear that very message. Maybe they have within their ranks both rich and poor, both people of high status and low, and kind of every other status in between, and probably people who are from the Jewish tradition and people who are Gentiles, people who are coming from possibly even across the borders. And what Luke seems to be saying through Jesus in the way that he presents this particular set of material is that all of them, they're interconnected in the same way that Jesus' pairings are interconnected. We can use Paul's language and say they're like one body. But really what's being said here is that they are not separated into haves and have-nots. And that they need to see this so that they can grow in faith and weather all of the adversity that surely will come, like a family drawing upon God's help and support in their ministries and life as a community of faith. Now, we know that the type of accomplishments that humans laud are not what brings us closer to God, and they are not the kinds of things that usually build up the whole community of faith. In fact, a lot of that stuff gets in the way. And what I love about these four clever little rhetorical pairings is that they allow us to call into question our entire model of human betterment. So, anybody else out there been watching the Olympics this week? A couple of us. I was amazed who was and who wasn't at the early service today. Well, I have. Lizzie and I actually had a special Zoom call. She's in all the way up in Olympia so that we could watch all the figure skating together. I love that stuff. I mean, faster, stronger, higher, all of those athletes, they are the closest thing that we have in the world to real life superheroes, and it is breathtaking to watch what they can do. But I also have to admit, there is nothing like spending a week watching people who have reached the peak of physical prowess and artistry and mental discipline to make us feel like, well, we could stand to accomplish a bit more ourselves in our own lives, And the thing is, as soon as we start feeling that way, well, turn on the computer, walk out the front door, go into a bookstore, open your newspaper, because there are plenty of, quote, influencers out there who are ready to tell us how we can measure and perfect our beauty, our productivity, our health, our wealth, and even our happiness. And you know what? It's usually by purchasing some product or service that they're there to conveniently provide. Well, Alexandra Schwartz at the New Yorker magazine argues that we may very well be improving ourselves to death. Here's what she writes. Our current era of non-stop technological innovation has yielded the hard doctrine of personal optimization. We must now chart our progress, count our steps, log our sleep rhythms, tweak our diets, and record our negative thoughts. Then we analyze all of that data, recalibrate, and repeat ad infinitum. We're being sold on the need to upgrade all parts of ourselves at once, including the parts that we did not previously even know needed upgrading. It puts us under a constant pressure to show that we know how to lead the perfect life. Later in her article, Schwartz introduces us to the authors Carl Sedstrom and Andre Spicer, who wanted to discover where this optimization trend leads people by spending an entire year in its trenches. They go to CrossFit, they do master cleanse liquid diets, they try mindfulness and yoga to the max, they consult therapists and life coaches and career coaches, and they even go out and attempt fun things like stand-up comedy. At the end of all of that, a full year of optimizing their lives, Spicer reflects that he spent this whole year focusing on himself to the exclusion of everything else and everyone else in his life. I mean, his wife, apparently she's about to give birth to their second child, which means there's a first child that's probably running around all over the house. She's kind of frosty towards him at the moment because he hasn't really been around. And their relationship, it is not the best. Spicer openly admits that after all of this optimization of his life, he doesn't actually feel like a better version of himself. In fact, he probably doesn't even feel like himself at all. So quite ironically, Spicer, and I'm sure others, have discovered that personal optimization can make life worse, not better. It's almost like it might be a curse. It's as if this thing that our culture and our human insecurities tell us to value, well, all that stuff may not be the be-all and the end-all that we all too often make them out to be. And when we do, woe to us. Now, don't get me wrong. I am not suggesting that we stop trying to be more healthy, better organized, or more mindful of how we choose to live. I mean, there is nothing wrong with any of these things per se. It's just the weight that we put into them and the exclusion of all other things. Don't let them define your self-worth, and do not let them set how you judge other people. Everyone's like, phew, I don't have to run home and throw out my pedometer if I don't want to. We're just being asked to remember that everyone gets sick and everyone goes through difficult times. And the core thing that we need to know is that God loves each and every one of us for who we are. And God's never failing presence is what's going to be there with us and carry us through. That's the true blessing that's in each and every one of our lives. Now, Jeremiah, he gives us a really stark image of how all of that works. He says all of that stuff that humans make into this kind of be-all and end-all, it is in fact all ephemeral. And if that's the only stuff that we choose to trust in, then we're going to end up isolated from God, we're going to end up isolated from each other, and we're going to become kind of like a parched and shriveled shrub left out in the desert to die. Then he gives us this gorgeous image, which he's also drawing from Psalm 1, that's in both places, saying that when we value each other and ourselves through the lens of God's love and grace, that changes everything. Then it's like a tree standing by the water with roots that dig deep and wide into that soil, drying up on that living water. And then it can grow branches to host an entire ecosystem, bearing fruit, having animals that live off of those branches and that fruit and all that it provides, and more plant life. He's saying we're connected. We're connected to God and we're connected to each other, kind of like an oasis of resilience that allows us to share all of our blessings and to weather all of our woes together. So Jesus calls us together. He calls us together at a level place where we can see each other and ourselves the way that God sees us. Jesus overturns all of the foolish attempts that humans often make to achieve blessing and to defeat and vanquish woes, as if either of those things were possible on our own. Jesus exorcises the demons that tell us that we are only valued for what we can acquire or the things that we can accomplish. Instead, Jesus is inviting us to grow in faith together. Jesus is inviting us to weather adversity kind of like an eclectic and loving family that trusts in God's care. Now, for humanity, that's healing and life-giving good news, don't you think? So I want to close with an old Pete Seeger sing-along song that I couldn't help but hear when we were doing this. And I have a feeling it goes right back to the Tent Revival days. You know, Pete Seeger, he re-emerges a lot of that stuff. It's called We Shall Not Be Moved. You guys know it? If you do, sing along. It's really easy. Just, we shall not be moved, just like a tree by the water. Here we go. We shall not be moved. We shall not be moved, just like a tree that's standing by the water. We shall not be moved. We're on this road together. We're on this road together. We shall not be moved. We're on this road together. We shall not be moved, just like a tree that's standing by the water.